The champagne flutes clinked together in celebration as Marcus Blackwood raised his glass toward the ceiling of his Manhattan penthouse office. The pharmaceutical magnate's eyes gleamed with the same predatory satisfaction that had built his empire from nothing into a $40 billion juggernaut. Surrounding him were the sharks he called his inner circle, each one worth more than most small countries, each one hungry for the next deal that would line their already overflowing pockets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Gentlemen and lady, Marcus nodded toward his VP of Operations, Victoria Sterling. Today we celebrate not just another acquisition, but the crown jewel that will cement Blackwood Pharmaceuticals as the undisputed king of global healthcare. His voice carried the confident boom of a man who had never been told no, never been denied anything his money couldn't buy. The marble floors of his corner office reflected the city lights below, creating an almost ethereal glow that seemed to worship at the altar of his success. Standing near the mahogany bar that cost more than most people's homes was Sophia Chen, her translator for international deals. She wore a simple black business suit that was professional, yet unremarkable, designed to blend into the background of these high-stakes negotiations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her glasses reflected the ambient lighting as she quietly organized the stack of documents that had arrived that morning from their potential partners in Geneva. Marcus noticed her movement, and his grin widened into something that would have made a lesser person uncomfortable. "Sophia, darling, come here for a moment." His tone was the same one might use to call a pet, casual and dismissive, yet expecting immediate compliance. "Bring those documents with you. I want to share something amusing with our guests." Sophia approached the group with measured steps, her expression carefully neutral. 3 years of working for Marcus had taught her the art of invisibility, of being present yet forgettable, useful yet disposable. She had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of his ego, and the casual cruelty that seemed to come as naturally to him as breathing. "Our Swiss partners," Marcus continued, accepting the documents from Sophia's hands without so much as a glance in her direction, "have sent us the final merger agreement for their biotech division. It's written entirely in German, naturally, and filled with legal terminology that would make even our top attorneys weep." The group chuckled appreciatively, their laughter echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Central Park. Marcus held up the thick document, its pages rustling in the air conditioning that kept the office at exactly 72 degrees, as was his preference. "Now, I told them we'd have a response by tomorrow morning. Our legal team estimates it will take them at least a week to properly translate and analyze this beast." He paused dramatically, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "But I have a better idea." Victoria Sterling, a woman whose blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of mild disapproval, leaned forward with interest. "What did you have in mind, Marcus?" The pharmaceutical king turned his attention to Sophia, who stood quietly beside the group, her hands folded in front of her as she waited for dismissal. "Sophia here claims to speak German, something about studying abroad, if I recall correctly." His tone suggested he had never bothered to verify this information, nor did he particularly care whether it was true. "So I'm thinking, why don't we put those language skills to the test?" The other executives exchanged glances, sensing the setup for whatever entertainment Marcus had planned. James Morrison, the chief financial officer whose handlebar mustache made him look like a caricature of a robber baron, set down his whiskey tumbler with a soft clink. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Marcus's smile grew wider, revealing teeth that had been professionally whitened to an almost unnatural brilliance. "I'm suggesting we make this interesting. Sophia, if you can provide me with a complete, accurate translation of this merger agreement by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'll give you something that will change your life forever." He paused, letting the tension build like a conductor preparing for the crescendo of a symphony. "I'll give you my quarterly bonus. All of it. $12.5 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient noise of the city 40 floors below seemed to fade away as the magnitude of the challenge settled over the room. Sophia's face remained impassive, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of her shoulders. "Of course," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false generosity, "when you inevitably fail, I expect you to publicly acknowledge that perhaps you've been overselling your capabilities. Nothing too dramatic, just a simple admission that maybe you bit off more than you could chew. Victoria Sterling laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Marcus, you're absolutely terrible. The poor girl doesn't stand a chance. She turned to Sophia with something that might have been sympathy if it weren't so obviously condescending. Sweetheart, this isn't some college German course. This is 150 pages of biotech merger documentation with enough legal terminology to confuse native speakers. Thomas Hartwell, the head of international relations whose bow tie never seemed to sit quite straight, adjusted his glasses and shook his head. The liability alone, if she mistranslates something critical, could cost us the entire deal. We're talking about a partnership worth $8 billion. Marcus waved their concerns away with the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Relax, everyone. When Sophia fails, which she will, we'll still have our legal team handle the real translation. This is just a little fun. He turned back to Sophia, his expression shifting to something that was almost predatory. Unless, of course, you're not feeling up to the challenge? Sophia looked down at the document in Marcus's hands, its German text dense with technical terminology and legal jargon that would challenge even experienced translators. The leather binding was embossed with the logo of Zimmermann & Associates, one of Europe's most prestigious pharmaceutical companies. She could see footnotes and annotations scattered throughout the visible pages, suggesting the complexity ran even deeper than the surface text suggested. I understand the terms, Mr. Blackwood, Sophia said quietly, her voice steady despite the enormity of what was being asked of her. When would you like me to begin? Marcus clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the expensive silence of his office. Excellent! The competitive spirit, I love it! He handed her the document with a flourish that suggested he was bestowing some great honor upon her. You have until 9 a.m. sharp. That gives you, about 14 hours. Should be plenty of time for someone with your alleged expertise. The elevator descended from the 40th floor with the smooth precision that only money could buy, but Sophia felt each floor in her stomach like a countdown to disaster. The document felt heavy in her hands, not from its physical weight, but from the impossible burden of expectation and humiliation that came with it. She knew exactly what Marcus expected. He wanted her to fail publicly, to provide him with entertainment at her expense, while simultaneously reminding everyone in that room of their place in his carefully constructed hierarchy. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Sophia walked through the marble lobby of Blackwood Tower, her heels clicking against the imported Italian stone that Marcus had insisted upon when the building was constructed. The security guard, an older man named Frank, who had always been kind to her, looked up from his desk with concern. Working late again, Miss Chen? Frank asked, his weathered face creasing with genuine worry. You've been putting in a lot of hours lately. Sophia managed a small smile, the first genuine expression she had allowed herself since entering Marcus's office. Something important came up, Frank. I'll probably be here most of the night. Frank nodded understandingly. In his 15 years working security for various corporate buildings, he had seen enough young professionals burn themselves out, trying to prove their worth to demanding bosses. You take care of yourself, miss. Success isn't worth your health. Outside, the New York evening was crisp, with the promise of autumn, and the city pulsed with its usual energy of ambition and desperation. Sophia hailed a taxi, giving the driver an address in Queens that was as far from Marcus's penthouse world as another planet. As the yellow cab navigated through traffic, Sophia opened the document and began scanning the first few pages. Her heart sank as she realized the true scope of what Marcus had given her. This wasn't just a merger agreement. It was a comprehensive partnership document that included technology transfers, intellectual property licensing, regulatory compliance frameworks, and clinical trial protocols. The German was technical and precise, filled with pharmaceutical terminology that would require not just linguistic knowledge but deep understanding of biochemistry, patent law, and international healthcare regulations. The taxi pulled up to a modest apartment building in Flushing, its brick facade worn but well-maintained. Sophia paid the driver and climbed 3 flights of stairs to her small but immaculate apartment. The space was a study in efficient minimalism, with bookshelves lining every available wall and a desk positioned near the window to catch the morning light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. What Marcus Blackwood didn't know What none of her colleagues at Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had ever bothered to discover was that Sophia Chen wasn't just another corporate translator who had picked up some German in college. Before circumstances had forced her to accept a position far beneath her qualifications, she had been Dr. Sophia Chen, holding dual doctorates in biochemical engineering and Germanic linguistics from ETH Zurich, one of the world's most prestigious technical universities. Sophia changed out of her business suit and into comfortable clothes, then sat down at her desk and spread the document across its surface. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Despite the late hour, she knew Professor Klaus Weber would still be awake. Her former thesis advisor at ETH Zurich was notorious for his nocturnal research habits. Sophia? Klaus's voice came through clearly, despite the transatlantic connection, his English heavily accented but precise. This is unexpected. How are you managing in New York? Hello, Professor Weber. I apologize for calling so late, but I have an urgent situation that requires some guidance. Sophia had maintained contact with Klaus over the years, though she had been deliberately vague about her current circumstances. He knew she was working in pharmaceuticals but believed she was in a research position appropriate to her qualifications. Of course. What can I help you with? Sophia took a photograph of several pages from the document and sent them to Klaus's email. I'm dealing with a merger agreement between an American pharmaceutical company and Zimmerman & Associates. The documentation is quite complex, and I wanted to verify my understanding of some of the technical terminology. There was a pause as Klaus presumably opened the email and examined the images. This is fascinating. Zimmerman has been developing some revolutionary work in gene therapy delivery systems. This appears to be related to their CRISPR modification protocols. His excitement was evident even through the phone connection. Are you involved in this partnership? In a consulting capacity, Sophia replied carefully. I need to ensure absolute accuracy in the translation. Lives could depend on it. Indeed they could. Send me the complete document if possible, and I'll review the technical sections. Some of this terminology is so new it hasn't even been standardized in English yet. After ending the call with Klaus, Sophia opened her laptop and connected to the secure VPN she maintained for research purposes. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she accessed databases and technical journals that most translators wouldn't even know existed. The document that Marcus had handed her as an impossible challenge was actually a window into cutting-edge pharmaceutical research that could revolutionize treatment for genetic disorders. As she worked through the night, Sophia began to uncover disturbing elements hidden within the technical language. Zimmerman wasn't just offering to share their gene therapy technology. They were proposing a complete integration that would give them unprecedented access to Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' research data, manufacturing facilities, and patient databases. More troubling still, several clauses effectively transferred ownership of any jointly developed treatments to Zimmerman's parent company, a conglomerate based in a country with notoriously lax intellectual property protections. The translation work was demanding but familiar. Sophia's years at ETH Zurich had required her to work with documents exactly like this one, and her doctoral research had focused specifically on the intersection of biochemical engineering and linguistic precision in technical documentation. What would have been an impossible task for most translators was, for her, a return to work she had once loved. By 3 a.m, Sophia had completed a rough translation of the entire document. But she didn't stop there. Using her knowledge of pharmaceutical law and biotech partnerships, she began preparing a second document that highlighted the problematic clauses and their potential consequences. If Marcus was serious about reviewing her work, he needed to understand that this merger would essentially hand over control of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' most valuable assets to their European partners. Klaus called back at 4:30, his voice energized despite the early hour in Switzerland. Sophia, this document is extraordinary. Zimmerman is offering technology that could advance gene therapy by decades. But the terms. He paused, and she could hear papers rustling. These terms are extraordinarily one-sided. They're asking for complete access to clinical trial data, manufacturing processes, even patient genetic profiles. This isn't a partnership. It's an acquisition disguised as collaboration. That's exactly what I was thinking, Sophia replied, making notes as Klaus spoke. The intellectual property clauses alone would transfer billions in value. More than that. If Blackwood agrees to these terms, They'll essentially become a subsidiary of Zimmerman within 5 years. The escalation clauses ensure that any dispute resolution favors the European partner. Klaus's voice became more serious. Sophia, I don't know what your role is in this negotiation, but someone needs to understand what they're signing. After the call ended, Sophia spent another 2 hours refining her translation and preparing her analysis. She printed 3 copies of each document, organizing them in separate folders with color-coded tabs for easy reference. As dawn broke over Queens, painting her apartment in soft golden light, she finally allowed herself a few hours of rest. Sophia's alarm went off at 7:30, giving her just enough time to shower, dress, and make the commute back to Manhattan. She chose her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that had been expensive when she bought it for her dissertation defense years ago. Looking in the mirror, she practiced the neutral expression that had become her armor in Marcus's corporate battlefield. The morning commute gave her time to mentally prepare for what was coming. She knew Marcus expected her to return empty-handed, to provide him with the public humiliation that would serve as entertainment for his inner circle. Instead, she was carrying documentation that could save his company billions of dollars and prevent a catastrophic loss of intellectual property. Sophia arrived at Blackwood Tower 15 minutes early, using the time to review her notes one final time. Frank, the security guard, greeted her with surprise. "Miss Chen! Did you manage to get any sleep at all?" "A little," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes the important work can't wait. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to her execution. Marcus's secretary, a young woman named Jessica, who had always been polite but distant, looked surprised to see her. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you," Jessica said, checking her computer screen. "He's in his office with the executive team." Sophia knocked on the heavy oak door and waited for permission to enter. When Marcus's voice called out, she stepped into the office where the same group from the previous evening was assembled, though now they were drinking coffee instead of champagne and looking considerably less celebratory. Well, Marcus said, looking up from his breakfast of organic steel-cut oats and fresh berries. "Our intrepid translator returns. I trust you've brought me something more substantial than excuses?" Victoria Sterling looked up from her tablet with barely concealed amusement. "Please tell me you at least attempted the translation, Sophia. It would be embarrassing if you gave up without trying." Sophia approached the conference table where the executive sat, her folder held firmly in her hands. "I've completed the translation as requested, Mr. Blackwood. I've also prepared an analysis of several concerning elements within the document that require immediate attention." The silence that followed was complete. Even the ambient noise of the air conditioning seemed to pause as the implications of her words settled over the room. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, his expression shifting from amusement to skepticism. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "I've completed the translation," Sophia repeated calmly. "The merger agreement has been fully translated with annotations for technical terminology and legal implications. Additionally, I've identified several clauses that would be extremely detrimental to Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' interests." Thomas Hartwell laughed nervously, adjusting his perpetually crooked bow tie. "That's quite a claim, Sophia. Are you seriously telling us that you translated 150 pages of complex pharmaceutical documentation overnight?" Sophia opened her folder and placed the first document on the table. The translation was meticulously formatted, with the original German phrases footnoted alongside their English equivalents. Technical terms were highlighted and explained in detailed margin notes that demonstrated not just linguistic accuracy, but deep understanding of the subject matter. Marcus picked up the document, his eyes scanning the first page with growing amazement. The translation was not only complete, but professionally formatted, with the kind of attention to detail that would be expected from a team of expert translators working for weeks, not a single person working through the night. "This section here," Sophia continued, opening to page 37 of her translation, "grants Zimmerman and Associates unlimited access to all clinical trial data generated by Blackwood Pharmaceuticals over the past 10 years. This includes patient genetic profiles, treatment efficacy data, and proprietary research methodologies." Victoria Sterling reached for the document, her expression shifting from amusement to concern as she read Sophia's translation. "Marcus, if this is accurate, they're asking for access to our most sensitive research data." "It gets worse," Sophia said, turning to another marked section. This clause establishes an escalating partnership structure that effectively transfers decision-making authority to Zimmerman for any jointly developed treatments. Within 3 years, they would have controlling interest in your gene therapy division. James Morrison, the CFO, grabbed the papers from Victoria's hands, his handlebar mustache twitching as he read. These intellectual property provisions. They're claiming ownership of any technology that incorporates their genetic modification protocols. That would include the entire pipeline we've been developing for the last 5 years. Marcus stood slowly, his face pale as the magnitude of what Sophia had uncovered began to sink in. Where did you learn to read this level of technical documentation? Sophia met his gaze steadily, her voice calm and professional. I hold doctoral degrees in biochemical engineering and Germanic linguistics from ETH Zurich. Before joining Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, I spent 6 years researching gene therapy delivery systems and pharmaceutical patent law. The confession hit the room like a bomb. Victoria Sterling's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering onto the marble floor. Thomas Hartwell's bow tie finally slipped completely crooked, and he didn't even notice. James Morrison's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. Marcus sank back into his chair, staring at Sophia as if seeing her for the first time. You're Dr. Chen. You're the Dr. Chen who published the seminal paper on CRISPR delivery mechanisms in Nature Biotechnology 3 years ago. That's correct, Sophia replied simply. But you're... Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't make his ignorance even more obvious. You work in our translation department. Because you never asked about my qualifications when you hired me, Sophia said, her voice still measured but with an underlying steel that hadn't been there before. You needed someone who could handle German pharmaceutical documents, and I needed employment that didn't require extensive background verification. The implications of her final statement hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria Sterling found her voice first. Background verification? Why would that be a problem for someone with your credentials? Sophia's expression softened slightly, revealing just a hint of the pain she had carried for years. Political complications in my home country made it necessary for me to maintain a low profile. Academic credentials can be verified, but they can also be traced. Sometimes survival requires accepting positions that don't reflect one's capabilities. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that destroyed his usually perfect appearance. 3 years. You've been working here for 3 years and you're telling me that you've been overqualified to the point of absurdity? I've been grateful for the employment, Sophia replied diplomatically. Grateful? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. You've been handling routine translation work when you could have been leading our research division. You've been sitting in on meetings where we discussed problems you could have solved immediately. Thomas Hartwell had finally noticed his bow tie and was attempting to straighten it with shaking hands. The Henderson Project. Remember the Henderson Project, Marcus? We spent 8 months trying to navigate the German regulatory requirements for our arthritis treatment. We hired 3 different consulting firms, all of whom failed to properly interpret the bioavailability requirements, Sophia added quietly. The German Pharmaceutical Authority requires specific genetic markers to be tested that weren't included in your application. It's why your approval was delayed. Victoria Sterling looked like she might be sick. We spent $2.3 million on consultants for that project. The information was freely available in the public regulatory document, Sophia said, but it was buried in technical language that requires both linguistic and biochemical expertise to properly interpret. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Central Park. The morning sun cast long shadows across his office, and for the first time in years, he felt small in his own space. Why didn't you say anything? All those meetings where we struggled with international partnerships, regulatory compliance, technical translations. Why didn't you speak up? Sophia's response was simple and devastating. You never asked for my opinion. In 3 years of employment, you've never once asked what I thought about anything beyond the specific translation tasks you assigned me. The truth of her statement settled over the room like a fog. Marcus turned back from the window, his usual commanding presence diminished by the weight of his own recognition. The quarterly bonus I promised. $12.5 million. Was a joke intended to humiliate me, Sophia finished. I understand that, Mr. Blackwood. No, Marcus said firmly, walking to his desk and pulling out his checkbook. It wasn't a joke. It was a test, and you passed it in ways I never could have imagined. He began writing, his pen moving with deliberate strokes across the expensive paper. You've just saved this company from the most catastrophic business decision in its history. Victoria Sterling had recovered enough to speak coherently. Marcus, we need to halt all negotiations with Zimmerman immediately. If Sophia's analysis is correct, and I have no reason to doubt it, we were about to sign away our entire competitive advantage. More than that, James Morrison added, still clutching the translation documents. We were about to hand over trade secrets worth billions of dollars. The liability exposure alone could have bankrupted us. Marcus finished writing the check and held it out to Sophia. This doesn't begin to cover what you've done for us, but it's a start. Sophia looked at the check but didn't immediately take it. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't complete this translation for the money. Then why did you do it? For the first time since entering the office that morning, Sophia allowed a small smile to cross her face. Because you challenged me to prove what I was capable of. Because I wanted to see if I still remembered how to be Dr. Chen, instead of just the invisible translator in the corner. Marcus extended the check again. Then take this as recognition of Dr. Chen's expertise, not payment for a translation service. This time, Sophia accepted the check, folding it carefully and placing it in her jacket pocket. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. It's Marcus, please, and I have a proposition for you. He returned to his seat, but his posture was different now, less commanding and more collaborative. Our chief science officer position has been vacant for 6 months. The board hasn't been able to find anyone with the right combination of research experience and business acumen. Thomas Hartwell's eyes widened. Marcus, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we offer Dr. Chen the position she should have had from the beginning, Marcus replied. Full authority over our research division, complete autonomy in international partnerships, and a compensation package that reflects her actual value to this organization. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. What about the Zimmerman partnership? Dead in the water, Victoria Sterling said immediately. We'll draft a polite rejection citing regulatory concerns. Meanwhile, I suggest we use Dr. Chen's analysis to develop our own gene therapy protocols without giving away our competitive advantages. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Instead of becoming Zimmerman's subsidiary, we become their competitor. With your expertise leading our research division, we could be the ones setting the terms for future partnerships. There would be conditions, Sophia said carefully. I would need complete authority over research direction, and I'd want to bring in my own team of researchers. People I trust, people whose work I know. Done, Marcus replied without hesitation. Whatever you need. And I'd want to establish a research ethics board with real authority. No more rushing treatments to market without proper testing. No more cutting corners on safety protocols. Victoria Sterling looked concerned. That could slow down our development timelines significantly. It could also prevent the kind of catastrophic lawsuits that destroy companies, Sophia replied. Ethical research isn't just morally correct, it's good business practice. Marcus stood and extended his hand to Sophia. Dr. Chen, would you accept the position of Chief Science Officer at Blackwood Pharmaceuticals? Sophia shook his hand, her grip firm and confident. I accept, with the understanding that this represents a complete change in how this company approaches research and development. Understood and agreed, Marcus replied. When can you start? I already have, Sophia said, gesturing to the documents on the table. My first recommendation is that we completely restructure our international partnership strategy. Instead of seeking deals that make us dependent on other companies' technology, we should focus on developing proprietary treatments that other companies want to license from us. Thomas Hartwell was frantically taking notes. That would require a complete reversal of our current business model. Our current business model nearly gave away $40 billion in assets, James Morrison pointed out. I think a reversal might be exactly what we need. Over the following hour, Sophia outlined a comprehensive strategy for transforming Blackwood Pharmaceuticals from a company that acquired technology to one that developed and licensed it. Her vision included partnerships with universities, investment in fundamental research, and a focus on treatments for genetic disorders that had been overlooked by larger pharmaceutical companies. As the meeting concluded, Marcus walked Sophia to the door of his office. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not just for last night, but for 3 years of treating you as invisible." "Apology accepted," Sophia replied. "But I hope you'll remember this lesson when you interact with other employees. Everyone has hidden depths, hidden talents. The person you dismiss today might be the person who saves your company tomorrow." Marcus nodded, understanding the broader implications of her words. "I'll do better. We all will." As Sophia left the office to begin her new role, she carried with her not just a check for $12.5 million, but something far more valuable: the restoration of her professional identity and the opportunity to use her expertise for meaningful work once again. The invisible translator had become visible, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the simple act of being exactly who she had always been. The girl who had hidden in the shadows to survive had stepped into the light to lead, and in doing so, had transformed not just her own life, but the future of one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from proving to yourself that you never needed to hide your strengths in the first place. 6 months later, the boardroom on the 42nd floor of Blackwood Tower buzzed with an energy that would have been unimaginable during Marcus's previous reign. The mahogany table that had once hosted celebrations of questionable business deals now served as the command center for what industry analysts were calling the most dramatic corporate transformation in pharmaceutical history. Sophia Chen sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding in a way that had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with competence. Gone was the invisible translator who had blended into the background of corporate meetings. In her place sat a woman whose confidence radiated from years of expertise finally being recognized and utilized. Her hair was styled differently now, shorter and more assertive, and she wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of success earned rather than inherited. The quarterly board meeting was about to begin, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Board members filed in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright amazement. These were titans of industry who had seen countless corporate presentations, but what they were about to witness would challenge everything they thought they knew about pharmaceutical development. Marcus entered last, his demeanor notably different from the arrogant swagger that had once defined him. The humbling experience of nearly losing his company to his own ignorance had fundamentally changed him. He moved with purpose rather than bluster, listening more than talking, asking questions instead of making assumptions. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, taking his seat to Sophia's right rather than at the head of the table. 6 months ago, this company was on the verge of making the most catastrophic business decision in its history. Today, thanks to the leadership of Dr. Chen, we're going to show you how close we came to disaster and how far we've traveled toward genuine innovation. Margaret Rothschild, the silver-haired board chairwoman whose family had been investing in pharmaceuticals since before penicillin was discovered, leaned forward with interest. "The preliminary reports have been impressive, Dr. Chen, but I think we're all eager to see the complete picture." Sophia stood, activating the wall-mounted display that replaced the pretentious art Marcus had once favored. The first slide showed a detailed breakdown of what would have happened if Blackwood had proceeded with the Zimmerman partnership. The numbers were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. 6 months ago, we were prepared to sign an agreement that would have transferred $8.7 billion in intellectual property value to our European partners, Sophia began, her voice clear and confident. Within 18 months, Zimmerman would have gained controlling interest in our gene therapy division, our clinical trial database, and our manufacturing capabilities. Board member Jonathan Hayes, a man whose pharmaceutical investments had made him wealthy enough to buy small countries, shook his head in disbelief. "How did our legal team miss something so obvious?" "Because it wasn't obvious," Sophia replied, advancing to the next slide. The language was deliberately obscure, buried in technical terminology that required both linguistic expertise and deep understanding of biotech partnership structures. Our legal team was competent within their specialty, but this document required interdisciplinary knowledge that we didn't have in-house. The next series of slides detailed the systematic review Sophia had conducted of all Blackwood's international partnerships over the previous 5 years. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Time after time, the company had entered agreements that favored their partners at the expense of their own long-term interests. They had been consistently outmaneuvered by organizations that understood both the science and the business implications of pharmaceutical development. The Henderson project alone cost us $2.3 million in consulting fees and 18 months of delays, Sophia continued. The Nakamura partnership gave away our pain management research for a fraction of its actual value. The Petrov collaboration essentially turned us into a manufacturing subsidiary for Russian-developed treatments. Victoria Sterling, who had remained as VP of Operations but now reported directly to Sophia, stood to address the board. Her relationship with Sophia had evolved from condescending tolerance to genuine respect, though the transition hadn't been without its challenges. Dr. Chen implemented an immediate audit of all pending international agreements, Victoria explained. We discovered that 63% of our proposed partnerships contained clauses that would have significantly disadvantaged Blackwood in the long term. The next phase of Sophia's presentation revealed the new direction she had established for the company. Instead of seeking partnerships that made them dependent on other organizations' technology, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals was now focused on developing proprietary treatments that other companies would want to license from them. Our new research strategy focuses on 3 core areas, Sophia explained, advancing through detailed slides that showed ongoing projects. First, genetic disorders that have been overlooked by larger pharmaceutical companies because the patient populations are too small to generate massive profits. Second, innovative delivery systems that can make existing treatments more effective and less invasive. Third, personalized medicine protocols that can be adapted for specific genetic profiles. Margaret Rothschild interrupted with a question that cut to the heart of pharmaceutical economics. Dr. Chen, while I appreciate the humanitarian aspects of treating rare genetic disorders, how do we justify the research costs for small patient populations? Sophia's response revealed the depth of her strategic thinking. By developing treatments for rare genetic disorders, we're creating proof-of-concept protocols that can be adapted for more common conditions. The gene therapy techniques we're pioneering for Huntington's disease, for example, have applications for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and even certain types of cancer. She advanced to a slide showing the interconnected nature of their research programs. Each project was designed to build upon the others, creating a comprehensive platform of genetic medicine capabilities rather than isolated treatments for specific conditions. Additionally, Sophia continued, rare disease treatments command premium pricing that often exceeds the profit margins of mass-market medications. A treatment that helps 10,000 patients at $200,000 per patient generates the same revenue as a treatment that helps 10 million patients at $200 per patient, but with significantly lower manufacturing and distribution costs. The financial projections that followed left the board members speechless. Under Sophia's leadership, Blackwood's research division had identified potential revenue streams that dwarfed anything the company had achieved through traditional pharmaceutical development. Thomas Hartwell, who had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer as part of the company's restructuring, presented the operational changes that had been implemented. His perpetually crooked bow tie had been replaced by a more modern appearance that reflected his increased responsibilities and newfound confidence. Dr. Chen insisted on establishing a research ethics board with real authority over project approval, Thomas explained. Initially, we were concerned this would slow development timelines, but the opposite has proven true. By establishing rigorous ethical standards from the beginning, we've eliminated the costly delays that come from regulatory challenges later in the development process. The Ethics Board, chaired by Professor Klaus Weber, whom Sophia had recruited from ETH Zurich, included medical ethicists, patient advocates, and regulatory experts from around the world. Their oversight had transformed Blackwood's approach to clinical trials, patient safety, and data transparency. We've also established partnerships with universities that give us access to cutting-edge research without the overhead costs of maintaining massive in-house research facilities, Thomas continued. Dr. Chen's academic connections have opened doors that our previous business development efforts couldn't reach. The presentation shifted to showcase the specific breakthrough that had shocked the pharmaceutical industry. Sophia's team had developed a novel gene therapy delivery system that could target specific cell types with unprecedented precision. The implications for treating genetic disorders were revolutionary. Traditional gene therapy faces the challenge of delivering genetic modifications to the right cells without affecting healthy tissue, Sophia explained, showing detailed molecular diagrams. Our new delivery system uses engineered proteins that act as molecular addresses, ensuring that therapeutic genes reach only their intended targets. Board member Elizabeth Canning, whose background in biotechnology gave her the expertise to understand the technical details, looks stunned. Dr. Chen, if this works as described, you've solved one of the fundamental challenges that has limited gene therapy for decades. The early results are promising, Sophia replied with characteristic understatement. We've successfully treated genetic blindness in laboratory models, and we're preparing for human trials next year. The financial implications were staggering. Licensing agreements for the delivery system alone could generate billions in revenue, while treatments developed using the technology could dominate the genetic medicine market for decades. Marcus stood to address the board, his expression reflecting a mixture of pride and humility that would have been impossible during his previous incarnation as a corporate tyrant. 6 months ago, I thought I was running a successful pharmaceutical company. In reality, I was presiding over a slow-motion disaster. Dr. Chen didn't just save us from a catastrophic partnership. She's positioned us to become the leader in next-generation medical treatment. The transformation hadn't been limited to research and development. Sophia had insisted on comprehensive changes to company culture, starting with how employees were treated and valued. The casual cruelty that had characterized Marcus's leadership style had been replaced by a collaborative environment, where expertise was recognized regardless of its source. We've implemented a policy requiring that every employee's background and qualifications be properly documented and considered for advancement opportunities, Marcus continued. We discovered that we had a materials scientist working in our cleaning crew, a former regulatory attorney handling mail distribution, and a biochemist managing our cafeteria. The systematic review of employee qualifications had revealed a treasure trove of hidden talent within the organization. People who had been forced to accept positions beneath their capabilities due to economic necessity, visa restrictions, or other circumstances were now contributing at levels appropriate to their expertise. Victoria Sterling presented the results of the Employee Review Program. We've promoted 67 employees to positions that better match their qualifications, and we've restructured our hiring practices to ensure that we're not overlooking talent in the future. The cultural transformation had immediate benefits beyond employee satisfaction. Project timelines improved as teams included people with relevant expertise who had previously been excluded from decision-making. Communication between departments became more effective as artificial hierarchies based on ignorance were dismantled. Sophia advanced to a slide showing Blackwood's new organizational structure. Gone was the rigid hierarchy that had concentrated decision-making power in Marcus's hands. In its place was a matrix system where expertise and project relevance determined authority, rather than traditional corporate politics. We've established cross-functional teams for each research project, Sophia explained. A genetic blindness treatment team includes geneticists, ophthalmologists, bioethicists, regulatory specialists, and patient advocates working together from the initial research phase through clinical trials and market introduction. The approach was revolutionary in an industry notorious for siloed thinking and bureaucratic inefficiency. By including diverse perspectives from the beginning, Blackwood was developing treatments that were not only scientifically sound but also ethically responsible and commercially viable. Margaret Rothschild raised a concern that reflected the board's fiduciary responsibilities. Dr. Chen, while these changes are admirable, pharmaceutical development requires massive capital investment with uncertain returns. How do we balance ethical considerations with the need to generate profits for shareholders? Sophia's response demonstrated the sophistication of her strategic thinking. Ethical development isn't a constraint on profitability. It's a requirement for sustainable success. Companies that prioritize short-term profits over patient safety inevitably face massive lawsuits, regulatory penalties, and reputation damage that destroy long-term value. She presented case studies of pharmaceutical companies that had collapsed due to ethical failures, showing how cutting corners on safety testing or misleading regulatory agencies had resulted in billions in damages and criminal liability for executives. By contrast, Sophia continued, companies with strong ethical foundations command premium pricing for their treatments because patients, doctors, and regulatory agencies trust their products. Ethical development is the ultimate competitive advantage. The presentation moved to showcase Blackwood's expanding international presence under Sophia's leadership. Instead of entering partnerships that made them dependent on foreign companies, they were now licensing their technology to organizations around the world while maintaining control of their intellectual property. We've established licensing agreements with research institutions in 12 countries, Thomas Hartwell reported. Rather than giving away our technology, we're generating revenue streams that will continue for decades while advancing medical treatment globally. The licensing strategy was particularly effective in developing countries where access to expensive medical treatments was limited by economic constraints. By allowing local manufacturers to produce Blackwood's treatments at reduced costs while paying reasonable licensing fees, the company was expanding access to genetic therapies while generating sustainable revenue. Jonathan Hayes asked about the competitive response to Blackwood's transformation. How are other pharmaceutical companies reacting to your new approach? Marcus answered with a satisfaction that was earned rather than arrogant. They're scrambling to catch up. 3 major competitors have attempted to recruit Dr. Chen, and 2 others have tried to license our delivery system technology. More importantly, Sophia added, they're starting to change their own practices. When industry leaders begin prioritizing ethical development and employee recognition, it benefits everyone in the field. The ripple effects of Blackwood's transformation were already visible throughout the pharmaceutical industry. Other companies were conducting their own employee reviews, establishing stronger ethics oversight, and reconsidering partnership agreements that might compromise their long-term interests. The presentation concluded with projections for the coming year that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Under Sophia's leadership, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals was positioned to become not just a successful company, but a transformative force in global healthcare. Our gene therapy delivery system will begin human trials in 8 months, Sophia announced. Early partnerships suggest potential revenue of $15 billion over the next 5 years, with applications extending far beyond our initial focus on genetic blindness. The room fell silent as board members absorbed the magnitude of what they were hearing. A company that had been on the verge of collapse just 6 months earlier was now positioned to revolutionize medical treatment while generating unprecedented profits. Elizabeth Canning was the first to speak. Dr. Chen, this is extraordinary work. I move to approve the research budget expansion and the proposed international licensing agreements. Seconded, said Margaret Rothschild immediately. And I'd like to propose a formal recognition of Dr. Chen's contributions to this transformation. The vote was unanimous, but more significant than the financial approval was the recognition of how completely Sophia had transformed not just Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, but the entire paradigm of pharmaceutical development. As the board meeting concluded, Marcus approached Sophia privately. The conversation that followed revealed how much both of them had changed over the past 6 months. I've been thinking about that night when I gave you the Zimmerman document, Marcus said quietly. I thought I was demonstrating my power, showing everyone how easily I could humiliate someone I considered beneath me. Sophia nodded, remembering the casual cruelty of that evening and how it had felt to be used as entertainment for Marcus's guests. What I actually did was reveal my own ignorance and nearly destroy everything I had worked to build, Marcus continued. You saved this company, but more than that, you saved me from becoming the kind of person I despise. People change when they're given the opportunity, Sophia replied. You chose to learn from the experience rather than doubling down on arrogance. That's what made the difference. Marcus looked out the window at the city below, contemplating how different the view appeared when seen through the lens of humility rather than superiority. I've been wondering if you ever considered just taking the money and leaving. $12.5 million would have been enough to start your own company. Sophia smiled, remembering her own thoughts during those first difficult weeks when the magnitude of the transformation she was attempting seemed overwhelming. I considered it, but running away wouldn't have changed anything. Someone else would have taken my place as the invisible expert, and you would have continued making decisions based on incomplete information. So you stayed to prove a point? I stayed because changing a broken system is more satisfying than escaping from it, Sophia replied. Besides, the work we're doing now matters. We're not just developing treatments. We're demonstrating that pharmaceutical companies can be both profitable and ethical. The transformation of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had attracted attention far beyond the corporate world. Medical journals were publishing articles about their innovative approach to drug development. Business schools were developing case studies on their organizational restructuring. Patient advocacy groups were praising their commitment to accessible treatment options. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. The World Health Organization had invited Sophia to chair an international committee on pharmaceutical ethics and accessibility. The position would allow her to influence global standards for drug development while continuing her work at Blackwood. "Are you going to accept the WHO position?" Marcus asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "I am," Sophia confirmed. "But that doesn't mean leaving Blackwood. It means expanding our influence on a global scale." The WHO appointment would establish Sophia as one of the most influential figures in international healthcare. But more importantly, it would allow her to advocate for the kind of systematic changes that could improve medical treatment worldwide. As evening fell over Manhattan, Sophia stood in her new office on the 43rd floor, looking out at a city that had once seemed indifferent to her existence. The transformation from invisible translator to global healthcare leader had been remarkable, but it was the deeper changes that mattered most. The pharmaceutical industry was beginning to recognize that diversity of thought and experience wasn't just politically correct posturing, but a practical necessity for solving complex problems. Companies were discovering hidden talent within their own organizations and restructuring to take advantage of expertise they had previously overlooked. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message from Professor Klaus Weber in Switzerland. "Saw the news about the WHO appointment. Proud of you for changing the world, one translation at a time." She smiled, remembering the night 6 months earlier when she had called Klaus for help with what seemed like an impossible challenge. That translation had been the catalyst for everything that followed. But the real transformation had begun years earlier when she had made the decision to survive and persevere, despite circumstances that had forced her to hide her capabilities. The lesson wasn't just about recognizing hidden talent or avoiding corporate arrogance. It was about the power of expertise to transform systems from within, the importance of ethical leadership in complex industries, and the recognition that everyone has the potential to contribute at levels far beyond what others might assume. Marcus joined her at the window, carrying 2 cups of coffee prepared exactly how she preferred it. The gesture was small but symbolic of how completely their relationship had evolved from master and servant to colleagues working toward common goals. "What's next?" he asked, handing her the coffee. Sophia considered the question, thinking about the gene therapy trials beginning soon, the WHO committee work, and the continuing transformation of pharmaceutical development practices around the world. "Next, we prove that what we've accomplished here isn't an anomaly," she replied. "We demonstrate that pharmaceutical companies can be both profitable and ethical, that employees can contribute at levels appropriate to their capabilities, and that the most important business decisions are often made by people who have been overlooked." The city lights below reflected their own glow back at them through the office windows, creating a sense of infinite possibility. Somewhere in those lights were other invisible experts waiting for recognition, other talented individuals whose capabilities had been dismissed or ignored, other opportunities for transformation that required only someone willing to look beyond surface appearances. The story of Sophia Chen's transformation from invisible translator to global healthcare leader had become more than a corporate success story. It had become a demonstration of what was possible when talent was recognized regardless of its packaging, when expertise was valued over politics, and when ethical considerations were understood as business necessities rather than inconvenient constraints. The pharmaceutical industry would never be quite the same, and neither would the countless other industries where similar transformations were beginning to take root. The invisible were becoming visible, the overlooked were being recognized, and the entire paradigm of corporate leadership was evolving towards something more inclusive, more effective, and more sustainable. In the end, the most important translation Sophia had provided wasn't from German to English. It was from hidden potential to realized achievement, from invisible expertise to transformative leadership, and from corporate arrogance to collaborative success. The language of change, it turned out, was universal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.